communication in the internet in Germany. One of the participants just in the discussion previously, after the presentation of Andreas, said, you know, anonymous communication, well, take a phone booth. It's anonymous. I put in money, but I won't show my ID. So is all this kind of anonymous communication that we do have, is this all illegal then? Or will we only criminalize the anonymous communication in the internet? So this is a discussion, so we shouldn't compare too much instruments by saying, if you don't accept this one, I will do that. We should look at each of the instruments. So the summary at the moment, by just looking at the possibilities, is we have, in the last 20 years, we've had a development of technology that would allow us today to implement different instruments for law enforcement agencies. Something like this, like activating a webcam, wouldn't have been possible 20 years ago because you haven't had a webcam. So today you could do it. You could install a keylogger, you can do fantastic things seen from a point of view of a crazy law enforcement agency. And it is absolutely obvious that the use of such software could potentially help the law enforcement agencies to carry out their investigations. It's true, it's clear. Without this instrument, it will be much more difficult, and in some cases impossible. This is the case. And if we allow them, I mean, it's a little bit difficult to say, but if it would be our decision here in the room now, and we would say, okay, go ahead, you can implement such a system, and we would restrict it. We would, for example, say, but not in any cases, not hacking cases or smaller cases, cybercrime cases, but only, you know, in the gravest breaches of criminal law, murder cases, for example. You would be allowed to use this instrument. This could prevent us from much stricter legislations, as I mentioned before. Ban on encryption technology is just one example. Okay, but now I would like to come to a point. I mean, this was just showing the site what is possible, and there might be even ideas you have where it would be possible to implement even more functions. But the next question I have for you is, does the fact that something is theoretical from a technical point of view possible, does this mean we do have to implement it? Is it necessary? Do we have to implement everything that is possible? And that's a good question. Mr. Schäuble says yes, of course. I mean, we're talking about crimes, we're talking about victims. I mean, terrorist attacks. Good. We haven't had any casualties from terrorist attacks in the last years, but nevertheless it could happen. So we have to think about the future. Your children, they could die in a terrorist attack. We can prevent it when we use the technology. Well, I can tell you one thing, and this is now very polemic. I mean, this is something we shouldn't lead a discussion in this way, but I can give you an example where we might have to wonder if we shouldn't implement more technology. Most of the child abuse cases are happening in families. That means if we could observe families that have kids, we could ensure, or we could at least try to prevent child abuse. So if we would, as soon as somebody gets a baby, if we would then start to install video cameras in the entire house, which is possible today, we would use cameras that do not even need a cable. They send out the signal, wireless cameras. Okay, if we would install them, I can promise you right away, we could stop some of those child abuse cases. So why shouldn't we do it? There were no casualties from terrorist attacks in Germany in the last year, but there were many children abused. Why shouldn't we install the cameras? Because we don't have to install everything which is on a theoretical point of view necessary. And this is I think we don't have a problem to answer the question, no, we don't want such an instrument. But this is the same question we have to ask us with regard to this instrument. Do we need it? Is it necessary? And I would like to have a look at the concerns, and I will try to make this rather short to give you the possibility to start a discussion about this. The installation of the software is a great problem for the law enforcement agencies. I mean, I'm on a regular basis working with them. I know the guys that are sitting there. I mean, they don't have the money, they don't have the capacity. I mean, you are hundreds and thousands, and they are 2 or 3 or 5 or let's say 10 people. And I mean, how do they want to ensure that they have a software that is working on every operating system, that is circumventing any kind of virus software, antivirus software, any protection offered by the operating system? It is pretty difficult. Some of you are using Linux, others use Macintosh system, some use Windows system. So you would have to install, or you have to design a software that works on Windows 95, Windows 3 point whatever. So this is a pretty tough challenge. And I mean, the software to prevent virus attacks is not pretty good, but nevertheless, first of all, they have to circumvent this, and that's something which is a real challenge for them. And in general, I am afraid that installing such a software could require the cooperation between law enforcement agencies and the private sector. They would need to ask Microsoft to open a backdoor for them, or they would need to ask the designer of antivirus software not to detect the software that they want to install. And at the moment where this is happening, and that was something that came from the CCC in a discussion with the law enforcement agencies, this opens the door for criminals as well. If the interest of the state is not anymore to have the maximum security for computer systems here, but they always say, well, 99% maybe, because we would like to be able to get into the computer system. So don't really close the system. Don't make it really close. Leave us a door. This is something that threatens me when I'm thinking about security, about computer security, because these backdoors could be used by offenders as well. And let us talk about the legal concerns. This was just the technical concerns, and I think there are many more arguments that will come from your side. Well, the protection of the suspect is a fundamental principle. That's what part of our criminal procedural law is about. One part is about the possibilities of law enforcement agencies to carry out investigations, and the other ones is restricting the power of the state and the law enforcement agencies and say, no, that's something where you shouldn't investigate. And if we are talking about rather small crimes, there are many more restrictions for the work of the law enforcement agencies than when we're speaking about serious crimes. So they already have a number of possibilities when we're talking about serious crimes, but nevertheless, there are limitations. And I mean, I cannot even imagine that when we're talking about a crime, let's say copyright violations, in some countries it's a crime, that they start to activate my webcam to see what I'm doing in front of my computer. They search my computer without me even recognizing it? No. These cases, there are just so very few successful investigations in the area of copyright violations in Germany, although we have criminal law provisions, because the courts do on a regular basis say, no, you cannot investigate in these cases by running into the flat of the person and doing your search and seizure procedures. First of all, you need better evidence. And it is nearly impossible to collect them without going into the flat. So many cases cannot be investigated because the idea is to protect the suspect. We need some kind of protection for the suspect. We need to ensure a proper fight against cybercrime on the one hand side, but it cannot be without limitations. So I see some great difficulties with regard to the existing CPC as well as the Constitution when it comes to the implementing of these instruments. So when we are talking, or if we are talking about implementing such an instrument, we are only talking about core functions. Maybe a keylogger, that could be something we could allow them, but definitely not activating the webcam in any cases. And we will talk about the question which authorities are allowed to make use of these instruments. Is it the police? Is it the prosecution? The Secret Service? And this is a question that needs to be discussed. Maybe it will only be the Secret Service, and only in terrorist cases, and only if there is a concrete threat of an attack. Not in any cases. And so what Mr. Schäuble said in the beginning, you know, it's important, it's necessary to survive, to get into private conversations, record them, have the ability to investigate there. This is something what I'm really afraid of. I mean, we're talking about private conversations. We're talking about everything. Maybe you talking to your girlfriend, to your wife, to whoever. Is this something that we should record? No, there should be limitations. So we have to concentrate which authority and which crimes. And there is another big problem that I see, and there are two big problems. The first one is, depending on how you use the system, we could really get in trouble with international criminal law. Because there's a fundamental principle of international law, which says investigations have to be carried out by the authority in the country. That means if you want to investigate here in Germany, you have the authorities. But if a German law enforcement agency would like to start an investigation about a criminal that is based in the United States, they cannot simply buy the next ticket to the United States and run around there and carry out an investigation. That's illegal. That's violating one of the most fundamental principles, and that's national sovereignty. You will need to cooperate with the law enforcement agencies. You are not allowed to do it without the consent of the law enforcement agencies. So what can happen is there is somebody, let's say a criminal, he's in Germany and he's committing a crime, and law enforcement agencies would like to install a forensic software. He's sitting in his hotel with his notebook and whoops, they install the forensic software via the internet. Let's say they would be able to do it. And then he's shutting down his machine and he's taking the flight back to New York. And in New York he opens the notebook again, and this software is now analyzing his hard disk and sending out all this information to the law enforcement agencies. Boom, we have a conflict with international law because we're carrying out an investigation in a territory outside our territory. It's illegal. So we would need mechanisms to control it, and I'm not too optimistic that we will find those mechanisms. So this is something, a rather uncontrollable instrument that we have. And the second thing is, internet is pretty global. In most cases, the offender and the victim are not based in the same country. We need international cooperation when we want to fight against those phenomena. So this is the reason why we are trying to harmonize laws. Because if we do not have similar laws, similar regulations, we cannot prosecute the people. If something is a crime in Germany but not in another country, for example, take racism, there is some acts criminalized in Germany but not in the United States. They have a different opinion about freedom of speech. We cannot prosecute them. So we need a harmonization. And this is not only with regard to substantive criminal law, the provisions that are criminalizing something, but with regard to procedural law as well. And what the German authorities are planning here, like gathering evidence by using a remote forensic software, that's at least my first overview after my first analysis, will in most countries of the world not be accepted as evidence in court. So what does it help us? We have a victim in Germany, we're investigating, we're doing something, and then we're presenting these evidence to the foreign authorities and ask them now to prosecute them. They can't, not on this basis. So this is a national approach that we have here. And this is something what I really don't understand. Germany was taking a leading role with regard to the protection of the environment now. They said we have to work together, all countries. We need a global solution. But they don't understand that with regard to cybercrime, we need global solutions as well. They should participate and they should make use of their arguments in international organizations and try to persuade the people to implement something like this instrument. And I can tell you there are much more people who will criticize this than we have with regard to the discussion that we had previously with regard to data retention. There were just very few countries who had arguments against the data retention directive, but with regard to this instrument there are many more arguments against it, and many more states out in the world who are saying, no, I don't think that we will need this instrument. So I'm coming to one of my last slides, and I would just like to explain to you, and I've presented the same graphic last year at the Chaos Communication Congress in Berlin. The question is always, how much more freedom or security do we get? And for reaching this security, how much freedom do we have to take? And there should be a balance. If I'm reaching very little security by taking a lot of freedom, we should ask ourselves now, this can't be the right instrument. And what is happening now, we have fundamental rights that can be triggered. And if our investigation goes into this area where we're touching fundamental rights, that shouldn't happen. And this is something which is happening with regard to this online search procedure. It is going into a direction that we can simply not accept if the state starts to investigate with these tools, with these very powerful tools in our private area, unless we have a very good justification that could only be the most serious crimes. This is something where I would say, okay, otherwise it's not the job of the state to ensure that law enforcement agencies can prosecute any crime. That's a mistake if people think that. We do not have to investigate all crimes. That's not necessary. we have to ensure a proper legislation. We have to ensure that the law enforcement agencies